Imagine, a 90-year-old woman sits alone in her apartment. Her children live thousands of miles away, her husband passed 5 years ago, and her body aches with every movement. Yet when you look into her eyes, you see something extraordinary, not resignation, not bitterness, but a radiance that seems to come from another world. What does she know that we don't? My dear friend, if you've clicked on this video, perhaps you're wrestling with your own fears about aging. Maybe you're watching your parents struggle with their declining years, or perhaps you're feeling the first whispers of your own mortality. The creaking joints in the morning. The names that slip away mid-sentence. The mirror that shows a face you sometimes don't recognize. Our modern world treats aging like a disease to be cured, a failure to be hidden, a descent to be feared. We spend billions trying to stop, reverse, or deny the natural flow of life. But what if everything we've been taught about aging is wrong? What if those silver years aren't a decline but a doorway? What if the very challenges of old age are actually invitations to the deepest peace you've ever known? Today, I want to share with you ancient Buddhist teachings that completely transform our understanding of aging. These aren't empty platitudes or wishful thinking, these are practical, profound practices that have guided millions through their final chapters with grace, dignity, and yes, even joy. Whether you're 50 or 90, whether you're preparing for your own aging journey or supporting someone you love through theirs, these teachings will illuminate a path you may never have known existed. Part 1: The Buddha's Own Encounter with Aging, the story that started it all. Before Prince Siddhartha became the Buddha, he lived sheltered in a palace, surrounded by youth and beauty. His father, desperate to keep him from spiritual seeking, hid away all signs of suffering. But fate, as it always does, found a way. One day, the young prince ventured beyond the palace walls. First, he saw an old man, bent and wrinkled, struggling to walk with a cane. The prince, shocked, asked his charioteer, "What happened to this man?" "My lord," the charioteer replied, "this is aging. It happens to everyone who lives long enough." "Even to me?" the prince asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Even to you, my lord. No one escapes." This encounter shattered the prince's illusions and set him on the path that would eventually lead to his enlightenment under the Bodhi tree. But here's what most people miss about this story. The old man wasn't just a messenger of impermanence, he was a teacher of truth. His bent body taught what no philosophy book could, that our true nature isn't found in our temporary physical form. Later, after his enlightenment, the Buddha himself aged. His back hurt. His stomach troubled him. His beloved disciples watched their teacher's body decline. But something remarkable happened. As his body weakened, his teaching grew ever more luminous. He used his own aging as a teaching tool, showing his followers that peace doesn't depend on physical strength or youth. One day, his attendant Ananda found the Buddha struggling with back pain. Ananda, distressed, said, "Lord, it pains me to see you suffer." The Buddha smiled and replied, "Ananda, this body is like an old cart, held together with straps and patches. But tell me, when the cart finally falls apart, does the journey end, or does the traveler simply continue on foot?" In his final days, at age 80, the Buddha gathered his disciples and gave them this ultimate teaching: all conditioned things are impermanent. When one sees this with wisdom, one turns away from suffering. This is the path to purification. Notice he didn't say, "Fight against impermanence." He didn't say, "Deny your aging." He said that when we truly see and accept impermanence, we turn away from suffering. This is the revolutionary insight that changes everything about how we approach our later years. Part 2, When Everything Falls Apart, a Story of Transformation. The story of Robert, a man whose narrative may mirror the struggles of many. Robert was the CEO of a successful tech firm. At 65, he was forced into early retirement during a merger. Finally, I'll have time for all those hobbies, he told everyone, forcing a smile. But within 6 months, his carefully constructed identity began to crumble like a sandcastle at high tide. Without the corner office, who was he? Without staff to lead, what was his purpose? Without meetings to attend, how should he fill his days? The golf courses he dreamed of felt like graveyards of pointless activity. The retirement community that his wife suggested felt like a waiting room for death. Then came the diagnosis, Parkinson's disease. The neurologist's words echoed in his mind, progressive, degenerative, no cure. Robert spent the next year in what he later called the night of the soul. He tried to maintain his CEO image, reading business journals he no longer cared about, attending networking events where he felt like a ghost haunting an old life. His tremor worsened. His wife, Sarah, watched helplessly as depression covered him like a heavy blanket. One day, Sarah dragged him to a meditation class at the local Buddhist center. Robert sat in the back, arms crossed, skeptical. The teacher, a woman in her late 70s with crippling rheumatoid arthritis, could barely hold the meditation bell with her gnarled fingers. Yet, when she spoke, something in her voice made Robert lean forward. "Welcome," she said. "I see some new faces today. Perhaps you are here because your life is not going according to your plan." She smiled. "Wonderful. When our plans fall apart, that is when real life can finally begin." Robert wanted to leave. This woman didn't understand. He had Parkinson's. He had lost everything. But something made him stay. The teacher continued, "I want to share a story. 10 years ago, I was a professional concert pianist. These hands," she held up her twisted fingers, "played Chopin at Carnegie Hall. When arthritis took my music, I wanted to die. My identity was so wrapped up in those flying fingers that I couldn't imagine who I was without them. But then I discovered something remarkable. When I could no longer make music with my hands, I learned to make silence with my heart. When I could no longer perform for thousands, I learned to be present for one person at a time. My arthritis did not take my life away, it revealed it." Robert felt tears streaming down his face. For the first time since his diagnosis, he was not crying out of despair but out of recognition. This woman understood. She had walked this path. In the months that followed, Robert immersed himself in the Buddhist practice. It wasn't the intellectual study he was comfortable with, but the raw, immediate practice of sitting with what is. He learned to observe his tremor without judgment, to watch the thoughts of decline without believing them, to feel his fear without being consumed by it. The strangest thing happened, Robert recently shared. As the body became less reliable, something else became more stable. Call it awareness, consciousness, whatever, but there is something that does not shake, even when the hand shakes. There is something that remains clear, even as movements become uncertain. Today, 5 years after his diagnosis, Robert leads a support group for newly diagnosed Parkinson's patients. He still shakes. He uses a walker now. But when the new members meet him, they always ask the same question, "How are you so peaceful?" Robert's answer is always the same: I stopped fighting what was happening to me and started learning from it. My Parkinson's is not an enemy, it is a teacher. It is teaching me that I am not the body. I am not the achievements. I am not the plan. I am something much vaster and unshakable. Part 3: The Buddhist Psychology of Aging. To understand how to find peace in old age, one must first understand why old age causes so much suffering. Buddhism identifies 3 root causes of all suffering, known as the 3 poisons: greed, attachment, hatred, aversion, and delusion, ignorance. In old age, all 3 intensify unless one learns to work with them skillfully. 1. Attachment, clinging to what is passing away. Suffering comes from clinging to the younger self, clinging to outdated self-images, trying to preserve what time is naturally transforming. Mary, 73, shared, I spent thousands on creams, procedures, supplements, all trying to look 50 again. One day, I realized I was exhausting myself trying to be a person who no longer existed. When I finally let her go, that 50-year-old Mary, I discovered 73-year-old Mary had her own beauty, her own gifts. The freedom was immediate. 2. Aversion, fighting natural changes. Hating what old age brings, limitations, loss, dependence. This aversion creates a constant state of war within the self. One is essentially fighting reality, and reality always wins. James, dealing with macular degeneration, found peace through acceptance. I spent 2 years angry that I couldn't read as I used to. Then my Buddhist teacher asked, what if the eyes are teaching you to see differently? Now I listen to audiobooks, and I swear I hear nuances I never noticed when reading. My failing eyes opened my ears. 3. Delusion, the illusion of permanence. The deepest suffering comes from the core delusion, believing that things should stay the same. Being surprised by old age as if one never knew it was going to happen. This delusion prevents one from mentally preparing for the natural progression of life. The Buddha taught, in all footprints, the footprint of the elephant is supreme. Similarly, in all subjects for meditation, the subject of death is supreme. This is not morbid, it is realistic. When one truly understands impermanence, one stops wasting time on what doesn't matter and invests in what does: wisdom, compassion, awakening. Part 4: Embracing the impermanence of life. The first noble truth of Buddhism is not that life is suffering, but that life contains suffering. This distinction is critically important when aging. The Buddha never said one should be resigned to misery. He said one should understand the nature of suffering so one can transform one's relationship to it. The parable of the second arrow. The Buddha taught, when touched with a feeling of pain, the untaught person sorrows, grieves, and laments. They feel 2 pains, physical and mental. It is as if they were shot with an arrow and immediately afterwards, shot with another arrow. The first arrow is the unavoidable pain of old age, aching joints, blurry vision, a slowing mind. This arrow cannot be avoided. But the second arrow, the added mental suffering through resistance, self-pity, and fear, this arrow one shoots at oneself, and one can learn not to shoot it. Patricia, 81, explained beautifully, my hip aches every morning, that's the first arrow. But I used to spend the whole day thinking, this is terrible, it's getting worse, soon I won't be able to walk. That was the second arrow, and it hurt much more than the hip. Now, when my hip aches, I simply say, good morning, hip. Thank you for carrying me all these years. The pain remains, but the suffering dissolves. The practice of radical acceptance. A practice one can try today. Sit comfortably and scan the body from head to toe. When encountering pain or discomfort, instead of immediately trying to fix it or flee from it, try this. Breathe kindness into the area. Whisper, "This is what is here right now." Add, "This too is temporary." Finally, may there be peace with what is. Notice how this changes the relationship to the discomfort. One is not denying it or dramatizing it, simply being with it, like sitting with an old friend who is having a difficult day. Part 5. Living fully in the present moment. An unexpected gift of old age that Buddhist practice reveals is the natural slowing down of time. When one cannot rush, one must be present. When one cannot multitask, one must focus. This is not a limitation, it is natural meditation. The wisdom of the tea master. There is a story of an elderly tea master in Kyoto who moved so slowly that impatient visitors would fidget and check their phones. One busy executive, frustrated, asked, "Why does it take so long to make the tea?" The master smiled. "I am not taking a long time to make the tea. I am taking exactly the time the tea requires. You are not impatient with me, you are impatient with this moment. When you stop trying to get to the next moment, you will discover this one is quite perfect." The executive sat back, corrected. As he watched the master's deliberate movements, something shifted. The graceful pour became a dance. The rising steam became an aroma. The simple act of preparing tea became a sacred ritual. As one grows older, one naturally moves at the pace of the tea master. One can fight this, feeling frustrated and diminished, or one can recognize it as an invitation to depth. George's Garden Meditation. George, 77, shared, "I used to pride myself on maintaining the whole yard in one afternoon. Now it takes a week to do what used to take a few hours. At first, I felt pathetic. Then I realized, when I was fast, I never truly saw the garden. I was pulling weeds. I was mowing. But I never noticed how the morning light caught on a spider web, or how the roses smelled differently at sunset than at noon. The slower pace isn't taking more time, it is giving more time, more richness in every single moment." The neuroscience of present awareness. Recent research supports what Buddhist practitioners have known all along: the aging brain, while slower at processing novel information, shows increased activity in areas related to emotional regulation and wisdom. The older brain literally sees more connections, patterns, and meaning. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a neuroscientist studying contemplative practices in the elderly, notes, "When older practitioners engage in present awareness, their brains show remarkable coherence across regions. It is as if old age naturally primes one for contemplative states, one just has to stop fighting it and start embracing it." Part 6. Transforming Loneliness into Sacred Solitude. Perhaps no aspect of old age causes more suffering than loneliness. Friends pass away. Children live their own lives. The social circle shrinks. But Buddhism offers a profound reframing. Loneliness is the ego's complaint about solitude, but solitude itself can be the gateway to the deepest connection. The Hermit and the Visitor. A successful businessman climbed a mountain to meet a hermit who hadn't seen another person in 5 years. "Don't you get terribly lonely?" the businessman asked. The hermit simply pointed to the vast forest around them. "Lonely? I am surrounded by friends. That oak has been my companion for decades. Those birds sing to wake me every morning. The wind tells me stories. The rain brings news from faraway places. You, my friend, surrounded by people but disconnected from life itself, you seem far lonelier than I. Sandra's transformation. Sandra, a widow of 3 years, describes her journey. After Tom died, the silence in the house was unbearable. I'd turn on 3 TVs just to have noise. I'd call my kids every day, probably driving them crazy. I was so desperate not to be alone that I couldn't truly be with myself. Then I joined a Buddhist Sangha, not for the philosophy but for the company. The teacher said something that changed everything. Loneliness is searching for yourself in others and not finding you there. Solitude is finding yourself in yourself and discovering you are complete. I started a simple practice. Every morning, instead of immediately turning on the TV, I would sit with my coffee in silence. At first, 5 minutes felt like forever. Now I sit for an hour, just being with myself. And you know what? I'm actually a good friend. Funny, insightful, kind. All these years, I was too busy being Mrs. Tom Wilson that I never met Sandra. The practice of compassionate connection. A powerful practice to transform loneliness. Sit quietly and think of a beloved person. Feel the warmth in the heart as one thinks of them. Now expand that feeling to include those they love, their community, all beings in the city, all beings on earth, all beings everywhere. Feel how the solitude connects one to the vast network of existence. One is never lonely, one is part of the infinite tapestry of consciousness, all of us aging, changing, seeking peace together. Part 7. Facing Death with Grace. The most challenging yet liberating teaching, a conscious relationship with death. In a death-fearing culture, death is seen as the ultimate failure. But Buddhism invites one to make friends with death as the most profound teacher. The 5 daily remembrances. The Buddha instructed his followers to contemplate these truths daily. 1. I am of the nature to grow old. There is no way to escape growing old. 2. I am of a nature to have ill health. There is no way to escape ill health. 3. I am of the nature to die. There is no way to escape death. 4. All that is dear to me and everyone I love are of the nature to be separated. 5. My actions are my only true possessions. My actions are the ground upon which I stand. Instead of being depressing, these contemplations are freeing. When one stops running from these truths, one stops wasting energy on impossible battles. One can invest that energy into what matters: presence, love, awakening. David's final teaching. David was a member of a Sangha who passed away last year from pancreatic cancer. In his final months, despite immense physical pain, he became a beacon of peace that drew people to his bedside. People keep saying I'm dying, he said 2 weeks before he passed, but that's not accurate. I'm completing. Like a river arriving at the ocean. The river doesn't die when it merges with the sea, it discovers what it always was, water returning home. His daughter later shared, Dad's illness was horrible, but something beautiful happened too. As the body weakened, something else grew stronger. He became more patient, more present, more loving than he had ever been. It was like the cancer burned away everything non-essential, and what was left was pure love. The deathless nature of awareness. This is the ultimate Buddhist teaching on death. Death is never truly about you. The body ages and dies. Thoughts arise and pass. Emotions come and go. But the awareness that witnesses all these changes, has it aged a single day? Can one find where it begins? Can one imagine it ends? Try this experiment. Recall yourself at age 5. Now at age 25. Now at the current age. The body has changed entirely. The thoughts are completely different. But is the awareness that witnessed all those changes the same? This unchanging awareness is the true nature, deathless, ageless, already free. Part 8, The Path of Practice, Daily Tools. Let's make these teachings practical with concrete exercises one can integrate into daily life. Morning practice, gratitude meditation, 10 minutes. Before getting out of bed, place a hand on the heart. Feel the heartbeat and the breath. Say, grateful for one more day of life. Name 3 specific things one is grateful for. Set the intention, may I meet whatever arises today with grace. Midday practice, the sacred pause, 2 minutes, multiple times. Several times throughout the day, stop whatever is being done. Take 3 conscious breaths. Notice 5 things through the senses. Ask, what is truly happening right now? Continue with renewed presence. Evening practice, loving kindness for the aging body, 15 minutes. Before sleep, scan the body from head to toe. At each area, especially those that ache, say, thank you for carrying me all these years. May you be comfortable. May you be peaceful. End with, may all aging beings everywhere find peace. Weekly practice, connection and service once per week. Reach out to someone who may be lonely. Offer to help someone who is struggling. Share wisdom with a younger person. Remember, giving connection creates connection. Part 9, The Ultimate Freedom, Awakening in the Golden Years. Awakening is not reserved for young monks in monasteries. In fact, old age can provide the ideal conditions for awakening. Why? Because awakening is simply the recognition of what lies beneath all the changes, the unchanging awareness itself. Zen Master Lin Chi's final realization. The great Zen Master Lin Chi, on his deathbed, gathered his students and said, for 12 years I have taught you about the Buddha nature. Let me show you where it resides. He then pointed to the candle beside the bed. When this flame dies, does the capacity for light vanish from the universe? With that, he blew out the candle and passed away, his face serene. The students understood, the individual flame may be extinguished, but the true light, consciousness itself, continues eternally. The mirror practice. A powerful practice. Look into a mirror. See the aging face looking back. Now ask, who is aware of this face? The face has aged, but has the awareness behind the eyes aged a single day? Can one sense the timeless presence that has witnessed every stage of life? This is not philosophy, it is the direct realization of one's true nature. The golden years begin now. If you have followed through this entire journey, the first step toward peace has been taken. The path is not about becoming someone else, it is about realizing who you already are beneath all the changes. Remember Robert, who discovered something in him that did not shake even when his hand shook. Remember Sandra, who found herself completely in solitude. Remember David, who saw death not as an end but as completion. They discovered what anyone can discover. Peace is not found by escaping old age but by embracing it as the perfect teacher. The Buddha's final words were, all conditioned things pass away. Strive for your own liberation with diligence. Liberation is not in a far-off future or a past youth. It is available right now, in this breath, with this body exactly as it is. Every wrinkle is a map of wisdom earned. Every silver hair is a badge of resilience. Every slow step is an opportunity for presence. Every loss creates space for grace to enter. You are not declining, you are distilling into essence. You are not ending, you are returning home. You are not lonely, you are reconnecting to the source from which all life springs. If this message has touched your heart, please subscribe to the Buddha Coha channel, where these teachings are explored weekly. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that old age is not a descent but an ascent to wisdom. Leave a comment sharing your own journey. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Remember, it is never too late for awakening. In fact, life has been preparing everything for this very moment, when you are finally ready to let go of who you thought you were and discover who you truly are. As you move forward from this moment, carry this truth in your heart. You are not a wave fearing the shore, you are the ocean itself, playing as a wave. The particular wave may be approaching the shore, but the self, the vast ocean of consciousness, remains eternal, peaceful, free. May you age with grace and wisdom. May you find peace in every breath. May your challenges become teachers. May your golden years reveal the gold that has always been. Thank you for joining Buddha Coha. Until next time, remember, the peace you seek in old age is not something to be achieved, it is something to be discovered. It has been there all along, patiently waiting for you to slow down enough to notice it. Namaste, beautiful soul. The light in me honors the eternal light in you.